Welcome to today's masterclass of Master the Art of Podcasting using the proven OPAL system. My name's Rose Davidson, and I'd just like to open up the chat again and just, where are you from, and why have you joined this masterclass today? What do you hope to get out of it? Hey, Dinesh, how are you? And Elisa, Marianne, I know you're here. Thank you so much for joining me today. So a little bit about me. I'm a podcast host and producer and teach others how to be podcasters. It's one of the things that I'm passionate about. I have been podcasting for the last 4.5 years. I've uploaded 576 episodes of Talking with the Experts. And I think it's 142 of the Healing Through Love podcast as well. So, yeah, I really want people to be able to use their voices through podcasting. I think it's a great way to build up your business and to become the go-to expert in your field. I started my podcast in 2020 because I saw how the pandemic was severely affecting small businesses, especially ones in the brick and mortar space. And we didn't see any way out of the pandemic. We thought it was going to go on forever, all the lockdowns and everything. And a lot of bricks and mortar businesses were closing their doors, of course, because no one was visiting. So I wanted to use podcasting as a way to show them and invite other business owners on to be able to show them how they could use the online space for their businesses. And a lot of businesses did actually turn around their bricks and mortar into an online space by offering deliveries and, using the things and their knowledge that they knew how to service the population. So a lot of them were able to reopen their businesses as online. Talking with the Experts features entrepreneurs who talk about a range of topics, including marketing strategies but they primarily focus on business operations, and listeners are able to learn from their knowledge and expertise. I rank in the top 5% of global podcasts. So I think that's a great achievement for the short space of time that I have been podcasting, because a lot of podcasters don't get past their first 100 episodes because they find that it's too time consuming, or they think that they're going to get a heap of listeners all at once. And unless you're a really well-known brand to begin with, those people that are wanting to listen to your podcast, it takes a long time to build up your audience. So please don't think that podcasting is going to bring you a lot of listeners to begin with, because it doesn't. So we're going to be using the OPAL system is something that I've created, and it's a step-by-step system that allows you to segment how you launch and grow your podcast. So I'd love you to put in the chat and who here is planning on running their own podcast, and have you got ideas in mind, or are you just here to learn how you can start your own podcast? I'd love to see those comments in the chat. So I guess, did you know that podcasts can help your audience see you as the expert? And so I'd like to share with you the OPAL system. So firstly, we look at organising your podcast, and this lays the foundations for your podcast. Then we'll look at producing, which is how to present and host your podcast. Thirdly is how to arrange your podcast, so the importance of editing your podcast. And lastly, it's how to launch your podcast and get that out into the world. And the world is changing, and so there are so many ways that we can consume information, and podcasts have become a great way to stay on top of what's happening in our communities. We can, just take them on the go. It's a lot different than video, where, you you've got to obviously sit there and watch it. But podcasts, you just put in your earphones and you can just go for a jog, or you can work at your computer, or go out and sit in the garden or have your coffee or do whatever. So that there's a huge opportunity for podcasts. And statistics say that in 2025, podcasts are going to be the go-to place for information. And research has shown that there are over 600 million blogs on the internet, but at the moment, there are less than 4 million podcasts. So there's a huge opportunity for podcasting in this space. And people are now recommending podcasts to each other. So there's no surprise that podcasting in Australia is growing so quickly. And podcasts now reach 9 million Australians, which is about 35% of the population. And they're looking at a 54% increase year by year on that. And personal reasons to start a podcast, well, you're passionate about a topic and you want to share your knowledge. It's a really easy platform to create content. You can create long form content. Podcasting can help you build a personal brand. It can be an alternative revenue source, but please don't think that's going to happen for you overnight, because it won't. It helps you to develop multiple different skill sets. There's minimal startup costs. Podcasting can be more fulfilling than video because you don't have to show your face. Some people have a face for radio. Not to say that everyone is like that, but they feel a bit shy perhaps to show their face, and so that using a podcast, which is just an audio only platform, is a great way to be able to. Let me just move that. Is a great way to be able to share your knowledge and not have to show your face. So I'd love you to type in the chat, what's holding you back from starting your own podcast? A lot of us are shy, don't think they have knowledge to share. I mean, I know Marianne's in the health and wellness space. I know she has a lot of knowledge to share around that area, and I would love for her to start a podcast. I think that would be absolutely wonderful for her to share her knowledge. Alyssa says she doesn't know the ins and outs. Vanessa said she has a bank of interviews. She's conducted summits. And she'd like to restart her own podcast with her own voice as well. Yeah, great comments. Time, Vanessa says time is what's holding them back. And yeah, time can be a factor. Marianne talks that she'd like to talk more on video, but she thinks a podcast would be great. Well, your video you can turn into a podcast, Marianne, and I'll go through that later on. But yeah, time is a factor in starting a podcast, because you have to set aside dedicated time to be able to do that. You can repurpose your content. You can target your audience directly, and it's a way of reaching a broader audience. And
I think you can go into the.
Can you just turn off your sound, please? Thank you. So laying the foundations for your professional podcast or organizers, the O part of OPAL. This is where you lay the foundations to your podcast, but there are some things that you need to know first. So learning the importance of the legal requirements, you need to choose your right strategy, how to create the perfect name and cover art for your podcast, setting up your podcast on the right channels for distribution, and setting it up on a budget, because a lot of people go out and buy all these whiz-bang bits of equipment when it's not really necessary. You can just start with your phone. You can just start with your laptop or your computer with the built-in camera and microphone that are there. The sound quality is not as great. However, if you are on a budget, that's a great way to start. So we'll touch on podcasting and the law, because it is really important to avoid problems with your podcast. You know, when you're starting and into the future, you need to consider your legal risks, because as podcasting grows in prominence, the likelihood of being in the legal spotlight increases. Irrespective of the size of your audience, you still face exposure to legal issues, and podcasters should conduct a legal stocktake to assess their legal risk and implement risk mitigation strategies. So mainstream media platforms include, newspapers and TV, often receive legal threats because, the articles or their programs are defamatory or unlawful in some way. So by publishing your content, which is consumed by the public, podcasts carry very similar risks. And you need to be aware that, you need to avoid defamation, because as podcasts are growing, so has the risk that a person who is a subject of a negative discussion may take offence and sue for defamation. And evaluating that risk of defamation is often challenging and usually depends on several factors, which includes the nature of the content being discussed. So is it controversial or is it contentious? Whether an individual is the subject of that content, and if they are, is that individual likely to take issue with what is being said about them, and whether the allegations or the things that are being said about them are supported by provable facts and evidence. There are such things as suppression orders in Australia. I'm not sure about in the US, but a judge may impose a suppression order on a particular case where names aren't allowed to be broadcast publicly. So you need to be aware that if there are suppression orders in place, that you have done your research, and breaching a suppression order can bring the fury of the court system down upon you, and you could be facing fines and or jail. So be aware that if you're discussing anything that is has a legal proceeding on your podcast, just check first. It's really, really important. You need to assess for misleading and deceptive conduct. So if you're incorporating advertisements into your podcast, particularly when you're reading out ads or you post ads on your social media pages, you must take care not to mislead or deceive your audience. That is really, really important. Podcasters should ensure that any statements representing products or services are true and accurate and can be substantiated. The Australian Consumer Law, which administers this, seeks to protect consumers from misleading or deceptive conduct. Guest releases. These are really important to ensure that if you're having a guest on your podcast, it is a really great idea to have them sign a release and consent form. This provides more certainty over the legal relationship, rights and responsibilities involved. In my podcast course, I have a free download of a guest release. I received that from somebody else. But I have a disclaimer at the bottom of my guest information form where guests fill out what they're going to be discussing, and there's a release form at the bottom. It's always a wise idea to have that. Always be careful of intellectual property, and don't, again, put that in your disclaimer to say that you own the rights to your podcast, and that any images or audio or video that is taken from that particular podcast is yours and you own it, but the person, your guest, still has the rights to their own intellectual property, which is their profile picture or their logo or whatever information that they supply to you. This is covered under the Copyright Act in Australia. In America, I'm sure there would be a Copyright Act there as well. Always offer disclaimers for advice. So if you're providing a disclaimer, it is necessary the podcaster, if they are giving legal or financial advice, if they're not trained or qualified in that particular area, they offer a disclaimer to say, for instance, that it's advice only and they are not a qualified practitioner in financial or legal advice. So make sure that that you have that on there, because it's really important if you are offering advice to anyone that and you are not qualified to do so, as in you have a diploma or a master's degree or any of those other things, you're not trained in that particular field, that you offer a disclaimer that you are offering advice only, and they should seek representation from a qualified person. So I guess when you're starting your podcast, you need to find that niche, and you can't be everything to everybody. It's easy to think that broader is better because you want your show to appeal to everybody. But when you don't have an existing audience, like as I didn't have, you need to actually narrow down what your podcast and who you service, because it's really hard to stand out. I mean, even though the amount of podcasts is quite small compared to blogs or those video, it is important that you narrow it down when you're first starting out. So talking with the experts is about business, and so I narrowed mine down to business owners only. It doesn't matter what type of business it is. I normally take the ones that are do marketing or entrepreneurship, or I'm now branching out into AI and all those other sorts of things. But you need to make it quite clear to your audience, or to attract your audience, that you have a niched down topic. And so finding your perfect niche it can be difficult. Some of you might be in the health and wellness space. Well, that's fairly easy to do. But if you're into, other things, it may not be so easy, and you need to find maybe just one topic out of your entire portfolio that you can niche your podcast down to, and then you can broaden it out afterwards. The Healing Through Love podcast, for instance, we deal with domestic and family violence survivors. So our guests that we have on, we're looking for people that can offer advice, or tips and tricks on how they can, how survivors can overcome the trauma that they have been through, and find that happy place on the other side. So it's important that that again we're finding our niche. So I think I've been through what is a niche, why having a podcast niche matters. I've been through it. It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to appeal to everybody, and you can't. But there is an exception to that rule. When you've got a profile already and people are searching for you and your specific content, you can be a bit more general, because you, the person, are the niche. Someone like Ricky Gervais can attract an immediate audience because he's Ricky Gervais, and he already has a niche following. So people are going to follow him whether he has a podcast or 10 podcasts. So he can talk about whatever he wants to do. So how specific does your podcast niche need to be? Well, it doesn't mean you can only talk about one thing for the rest of your life. But finding those filters is really important. So if you're interested in starting a podcast in the fitness category, perhaps It'll be much harder to stand out if your show covers fitness than if you find a niche within that topic. I've noticed a lot in my Facebook feed lately about people are offering chair yoga. So, if you want to have a podcast about chair yoga, great. A podcast title also gives your show a bit of personality and says to people, who you are, what they're having difficulties with, how they can get motivated, and, how they can find you as their go-to expert. So here are some questions to help you to come up with some ideas. What do people come to you for advice for? What are you comfortable talking about at length? What hobbies or activities do you enjoy? What makes you excited every day? What do you feel really passionate about? What would other people call you an expert about? So that they're the things you need to think about finding your niche. It also helps you to browse through other podcasts on Apple or Spotify for ideas, because you don't really want to copy anyone else's ideas, and these might get your brain a little bit turning around to think about, what can I do to bring more awareness to my audience. And it's really important that you think about subjects that you love, and things that you're really passionate about. You also need to consider about what makes you different. If you want your show to stand out, it helps to have something different that no other host can offer. This is a key to being competitive in a saturated podcast niche, and it gives people a reason to listen to your show above all the others. So whether it's your interviewing style or your topics that you're discussing, think about what is your point of difference, and consider your strength and your expertise. Your podcast should focus on a topic that you understand really, really well. So if you know that subject well, you'll have an easy time talking about it, and plus the content will be better than if you were learning it all from scratch. And think about what's relevant in the world. So what's going on in your particular industry? What's changing about the world? What is on the top of everyone's mind now that people want to learn more about? Consider whether any of these trending topics could be your podcast niche. And also consider other podcasts. So take a few moments to evaluate your competition, because each podcaster is your competition. So how does what you want to deliver, how is that appealing to other people? Who are the major players in your particular niche? What are their show formats? What makes them popular? Pull up any category that you're interested in and browse it for a bit and see how many other people are in that particular area of expertise, and see how you can make your podcast stand out from theirs. And bear in mind that there are a lot of famous people out in the world giving podcasts, but take bits and pieces from theirs, and maybe you could make yours stand out, and what they do can help you along your journey. You also might want to think about monetization. This doesn't often happen from the very first episodes. It's wise to think about how you choose your podcast niche, because almost any show can be monetized, and there are many ways to be able to do that. But you want to consider which strategies you're going to be using and which ones are right for you. So, like most shows, you'll sell ads, but you need to. But you could also, offer private coaching. You could sell courses. You could collect donations, sell merchandise. You just need to consider the podcast niches on your list and how that lends themselves to one kind of monetization type or another. Should you have a guest on each episode? Well, the choice is yours. You can, have a solo podcast, or you can, interview guests. And if you are having guests on your podcast, make sure that you are in charge of the conversation and you steer the conversation in a way that serves your business. There is a caveat to this. And the first thing to consider is, when you're looking to answer any question, what is the purpose of your show? You need to keep that in your mind at all times. What is the purpose of your show? Is it to grow an audience and sell advertising space, or is it just to inform, the broader audience? Again, podcasting without guests, so having a solo podcast, poses a challenge to hosts, because they are the center of the whole show. And the host needs to be knowledgeable, they need to be approachable, and they have to be entertaining. And it requires crafting a perfect formula for your show, and needs to meet listeners' expectations by continuously delivering that outstanding value. Now, first impressions. It's essential to make a brilliant first impression on your very first episode. I mean, it doesn't just stop at your cover art that you create to promote your show. If you have, bland and uninspiring artwork that doesn't stand out, getting new listeners to your show won't be easy. Excuse me, I'll just take a drink. You might have the greatest content, but your potential listeners will judge the book by its cover, and normally you don't buy a book if the cover's a bit bland. So make sure that your podcast art stands out. So having a great name for your podcast, and your cover art is really, really important. You can't register your podcast with any of the podcast hosting channels if you don't have a cover art. So you can create your cover art in things like Canva, but as you grow, it doesn't hurt to tweak that cover art and make it, really, really stand out. There are some technicalities to creating podcast artwork for directories. If you want to get the right amount of visibility for your podcast, you need to ensure that your cover art is accepted by all major directories. If it doesn't meet the size criteria, then podcast directories probably won't display your cover art. And there are two ways to design your art. As I said, you can create your art in Canva, and there are a myriad of other do-it-yourself tools that you can use. I would suggest that you use Canva Pro, just because you get a lot more design options in there. But if you want to go for the free version, that's fine. There's other things like Adobe Spark, which is for people that don't have any design experience at all, and you can actually pay someone to use it. You can go to things like 99 Designs or Fiverr, or I don't know what else is out there to create, but they're just some examples of where you can go. But yeah, Canva's my go-to place for anything like that. You need to choose a channel host. So and there are a lot of them out there. But what does a hosting service do? It's important to know that it is a necessary part of creating a show. These companies function like a web host. So you create your content and then you pay them to store it and upload it to the marketplace. Like I use SoundCloud, and then I go to Apple and register, and go to Spotify and register. But there's an RSS feed, and I'll discuss about what that is. And you put that into Apple and Spotify, and so you only need to upload once your podcast once to, for example, SoundCloud, and then they pull that information for Apple and Spotify pull that information, and so your podcast is hosted on those channels, and you don't need to pay for that. So there are three essential roles of a podcast hosting service. It stores your audio files. It publishes your audio files to apps like Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher, and it manages all the back-end processes like listener analytics. So now I've noticed that if I go to Apple for podcasters, my stats aren't very good. But if I go to SoundCloud, where my podcast is hosted, I have really great stats, and so SoundCloud is pulling all the stats from Apple and Spotify and telling me, what my audience is. The cost of these hosting services vary. SoundCloud I found to be the least expensive compared to others, but you can use a lot like Anchor is one that you can use, but I found places like that to be quite expensive. Now, talking about the RSS feed that you need to have, it is what makes your podcast your podcast. It's in a unique number, web address just to you. It's like the engine in your car. Without it, a podcast isn't complete, and it is what powers your podcast. Basically, it contains all the information that makes up your podcast and allows you to share it out into the world. RSS stands for really simple syndication. Think of it as a news feed or your Instagram feed. As posts are published, they become available for you to see. When a podcast episode is published, that information is added to your RSS feed, and that feed is responsible for sharing and distributing that content to specific platforms. So what it does, it contains your show title, the information that you've added about your show, and the episode details. It has everything necessary to add your podcast to directories like Apple or Spotify. And it gets passed around to all these things. And when you add and publish a new episode, your RSS feed updates to reflect that information and pushes it to the directories you've syndicated your podcast to. Now, podcast distribution is defined as simply sharing your podcast on listening platforms such as Apple or Spotify, and this will help you to reach a larger audience. So your podcast distribution helps listeners find your show. And so how are these podcasts distributed? Well, again, through your RSS feed. Studio setup. Now, as I said, you can start your podcast on a budget. You can use your phone, you can use a laptop, you can use a desktop computer, and use all the built-in features that are available when you're starting out. Now, a lot of people suggest that you need, microphones and earphones and, big cameras and powerful cameras, and you don't need any of that stuff to start with. You can start off really, really inexpensively. Now, the streaming setup is a little bit different. What you need to do, if you're going to be doing video, I suggest you use Zoom, but you can, as I said, use your smartphone. It contains all the streaming setup in terms of hardware and even most of the software that you'd need. Plus, the websites that allow you to stream live videos usually have apps that let you stream to them directly from your smartphone. The fastest and easiest way to live stream isn't always the best. Sometimes there might be some essential requirements for streaming via your smartphone. So using an app to stream with a smartphone becomes a little bit difficult. For example, you can't use YouTube smartphone app for live streaming unless you have at least 1,000 subscribers. So in that way, you'll need to use your laptop or your desktop. So starting just with your smartphone is the perfect way. Next, we're going to be discussing produce your podcast like a pro and become a podcast wizard, and you be able to put it all out into the Ethernet as far and wide as you can imagine. Firstly, you need to be a great host, and that is in terms of being a great interviewer. You need to know the right questions. You need to know how to make your audience, your guest, feel at ease from the moment they log into your Zoom account or however it is that you're going to be live streaming to or recording to. Some do's and don'ts. Podcasting is a way, or I mean, hosting is the way of, controlling the content of what you're doing. Becoming a great podcast host takes a little bit of skill and practice and a little bit of expertise. But being calm and collected and just ensuring that everything flows is the most important thing. What it isn't is the things like what they do on morning breakfast shows on TV or late night interview segments. It's not that. It's just having a discussion with your guest. It's not all the bells and whistles that go with it. There, I have an ebook out. I will share that at the end. It's called 10 Common Podcasting Mistakes and How to Fix Them, and it will help you to get through all this and figure out what hosting is about, and having great guests on. Having confidence on camera is important. You need to build your confidence, and you can do that in a number of ways. You need to look and you need to sound your best. So having great audio is really important. Finding the perfect guests doesn't need to be a challenge. I use matchmaker.fm. There is a free version out there. You create a hosting sorry, I've lost for words at the moment, a podcast host section, and then that goes out into their directory, and people will click on your podcast if they're interested in being on. I've recently found a new one. It's called Podmatch. Love it. I'm getting a lot of guests from there. But when I first started, matchmaker.fm was where I got all my guests from. And once your podcast become better known, you will get podcast booking agencies actually emailing you to get their clients onto your podcast, which is happening to me at the moment, which I was rather chuffed by. Towards the end of last year, a number of agencies contact me and say, I've got this great guest for you. Let's have them on. So make sure you've got processes in place for that. You need to engage your audience, and that is, make sure you've got great content, basically. Because as we know, podcasts are, really easily consumable. You can be walking down the street, riding your bike, doesn't really matter. So you need to be able to engage your audience. There are some email tips that you need to be mindful of. You need to have follow-up emails once you've conducted your interview. Make sure that you have that follow-up email, asking them, did they enjoy their time on the show? Will they leave you a review? And make sure that you share links. So if you're loading to YouTube and to your podcast host, make sure you share those links so they can share with their audience. And it's always, please, always follow up with your guests. Know your numbers. You'll find those through the analytics of your podcast host and understanding how they work. It would just show you on, shows you your demographics. So who's listening, what country they're from. Some host providers provide other demographics like age groups, which is really helpful to you. So you know how to target your audience more closely. The A part of OPAL is arrange. So the importance of editing is to keep your listeners listening for longer. The outro should be, so your intro should be, to get people interested in listening to the episode, and your outro should be a call to action to let listeners know next steps. I had my intro and outro created by someone in Adelaide, and they, put the music behind it. They said a few words, but you don't have to get it done professionally. You can just do it yourself, but just make sure that it's engaging. Make sure that you use royalty-free background music, because YouTube especially know that if you have music, they check it for royalty-free, and any copyright, and they'll flag your episode if there's any infringements whatsoever. And make sure that the images that you use too are royalty-free images. And if you use videos as well, to use your intro and outro, make sure that they are royalty-free and they're copyright-free as well. Editing your podcast sets you up for success. You've done all that hard work. You found your guest, you've prepped your content, you've recorded your content. Now it's just time to polish it up. And polishing up means that you can get more downloads, you can get better guests, and you can grow your revenue. For complete beginners, it can be a little bit intimidating and a huge learning curve, but it's something that you need to do. Unless you're doing it live, then there's nothing you need to edit. But if you're pre-recording, make sure that you have a little bit of knowledge about editing, or outsource it, because editing is where you add the polish to your episodes. And the final part of the OPAL system is launching, and that is to get your podcast out into the world. So you need to get ready now to launch your podcast, and that it means distributing it through to all your channels. And some statistics that, might be 20% of Americans that are more than a decade old listen to at least one podcast per month. Apple Podcasts has well over 1 billion subscribers. Radio Addict is another podcast network for Android. Has recorded over 10 million downloads, and Podcaster, also a podcast network on Android, has 10 million downloads as well. So finding the right places to distribute your podcast is really, really important. How and where? I explained that to you before about having a podcast host and then putting that RSS feed into other podcast channels like Apple and Spotify. Establishing your authority, well, that is, narrowing down your niche, making sure that, that you're addressing pain points and concerns of your audience, and filling a void in their life, and, wanting them wanting them to come back to listen to further episodes. Monetizing your podcast. Well, we've gone through that. You can have ad placement on your podcast, so you can have your own ads, or you can invite others to advertise and then charge them a fee. You can ask for sponsorships. You can do that through Patreon, or you can do that through Buy Me a Coffee, places like that. So don't expect it, as I said, to be done overnight. It does take some time. I didn't start talking with the experts specifically to make money. In fact, I've never made any money out of it. I didn't start it for that purpose. I just started it because I wanted to help business owners have better businesses. So I'm thinking about changing that philosophy in 2025, but I'm still thinking on it. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for staying with me through all this. If you would like to book a discovery call with me, I'll put the link in the chat. This is to book a discovery call and to chat with me about how you might be able to start your podcast. Book a discovery call is how I can help you start your own podcast. If you've got any concerns or any issues that you want to ask me, if there are any questions. Hey, Marianne, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I guess I think the comment that I put in was I love talking more than I love video. So I know that's the reason why I want to start a podcast. I'm just not sure how to do it. So I've clicked your link. I'm going to book in to have a chat with you about how
Wonderful.
I can do that.
Yeah. All right. And I was going to share with you an ebook, which is the 10 podcasting mistakes, and that'll help you through the things that most people have a problem with and how they can fix those. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, then I'll say goodbye for now. And please do reach out if you want help with the podcast, whether it's audio or video or both. I'm open to helping you to do both of those things. And I will hopefully hear from you in the near future. Bye for now.